So today we're going to talk about the mind. And of course, that's such an important, it is the focus in our meditation. Even if we're focusing on the body, feelings, or Dhamma, the mind's got to be there on track. So find a comfortable position where your spine can be straight, but of course not rigid, not holding tightly, but being relaxed and aligned. There's this interesting tension between being alert and being relaxed that we want to land in. Even calling it tension is contrary to what we're wanting to develop here. But there is an interplay, you might say. Giving some attention to the body, noticing where it might be tight or holding. Inviting those places to relax. Sometimes an invitation isn't enough. We can take some deep breaths in the beginning. And let the breath carry the tension away from the body as you exhale. Sometimes I imagine that tense energy, that holding, that tightness flowing downwards out my feet into the ground. So the main thing for the body is for it to be comfortable and relaxed so that it really can be tranquil and at ease as much as possible. And of course, there are many times when it's not possible. Last night I was embarking on a 2-hour sit and my hip was really hurting. So after 20 minutes, I had to get up and move to a chair. But you can do all that mindfully, alert, present, and kind, not at odds with the pain. Giving it a chance to express what it needs to express, and some kindness and compassion. And the shift in posture helped a lot. So the beginning instructions of mindfulness of in and out breathing help us to settle the body, establishing mindfulness and being aware of our in-breath and our out-breath and noticing how long the in-breath is, how long the out-breath is, or deep or shallow, whatever measure really feels useful to you. And it's that attention to the in-breath and out-breath that helps us to begin to settle. And as soon as we begin to become really comfortable with that in-breath and out-breath, and the Buddha encourages us to be aware of the entire body. And get a sense of the whole body breathing. And tranquility kind of settling on it like soft snow. And as the body relaxes, that tranquility is developing. And it's natural to feel certain sensations. What are the feelings that arise in the body that tell you that you're relaxed? And can you separate that from a feeling of drowsiness or what you might experience as you're about to fall asleep? Because this is distinctly different. Our aim here is to have that relaxed openness and be mentally alert and present. These sensations arising in the body, maybe tingling, maybe warmth, maybe a feeling of fullness. And wherever you might experience even just a subtle, pleasant feeling that comes from being mindful and present, kind, that this is where we want to put some attention. And without actively encouraging it to grow, just bringing our attention to these sensations and feelings, they automatically expand. Sometimes we try too hard and then it stops the natural unfolding. Can we just be present with this? Maybe subtle sensation in the hands, or it's this feeling of goodness or kindness or pleasantness in the heart. What it feels like to be alert and relaxed, mindful, kind. And you might also notice if any part of the body has tensed up a little bit. Sometimes when thoughts arise, then certain muscles tense up. And we can revisit that area and maybe bring it some soothing care. And it's interesting that after the Buddha says to put attention on feelings of piti and sukha, only then does he say, direct your attention to your thoughts, activities of the mind, and encourage them to calm, to let go. So each step of the way, we're really practicing renunciation, letting go of things that are disturbing, that are agitating, that are irritating, letting go of responsibilities, letting go of identities, letting go of patterns. And putting the mind on the wholesome, peaceful, uplifting, however that forms for you in this moment. What calms the mind and lifts the heart. And here we can begin to be really aware of our clear intention of mind. That we stay with the meditation object. We are aware of that in-breath and out-breath through the whole process, beginning to end. So before is the same as after. The beginning the same as the end. Because of the quality of our attention. The consistency of our attention. And the clarity of our purpose. Staying present and aware. Calming the body, calming the mind, uplifting the mind, and observing what arises with interest and curiosity, with a lightness and kindness of heart. Just keep letting go and letting go. And trust in this process. Trust in the knowing that is accessible within. Oh, good morning again. I think I'm going to share my screen with you in a minute. But first, I'll just say a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. And of course, this is the third week talking about the IDDHIPADA, the four bases of psychic potency or spiritual power. So the first one is desire, chanda, which we discussed. And then last week we talked about virya, energy, and today we'll talk about citta, the mind. And then next time, vimamsa, investigation. And so each of these, as most of you know, are the basis for how to go into deep samadhi. That's the way the Buddha talked about it. So whether our meditation in a particular session is really based on the fuel of wholesome desire, excuse me, or whether it's based on the fuel of energy, or whether it's based on the fuel of mind is a little funny. We're going to get into that today because it's the citta, but there are different ways of using that word. And in this case, the compound is citta samadhi. And it's the purity of mind or the mental development that is the basis for going into deep samadhi. And then, of course, the last one is investigation, vimamsa, as I said, as the basis for the samadhi. But in all these cases, many times teachers, Dhamma teachers will talk about how these are all applicable in our normal daily life as well, in the world, in anything that we want to take up, to do, to make successful. We have to have these qualities. We have to have that desire to do it. We have to have the energy that we put into it. And the purity of mind or the clarity of mind, it's really easy to see in some kind of activity or project that you want to do, that you have to have a clear vision of what that's about, what your purpose is. I guess the whole kind of area in companies about, having a vision statement and a mission statement and all of that, that's all part of citta. In this case, as we're looking at citta as the basis or the fuel for undertaking something, the basis or the fuel for development. And so we have to understand what we're doing and where we're going, and the clarity or the purity of mind. When you really look into it, get a sense of what that is, how that feels. What is it like when the mind is really focused, really clear about what it's doing? So during the meditation, I was relying on the structure of mindfulness of in and out breathing. That helps to give a clarity to mind. We know what we're doing. We kind of have an idea of where we're going. So it's pretty directed. And this is quite different, it seems to me, from a lot of what's being taught for meditation, this kind of idea that we should just sit and observe everything that comes through. Like that's, much more, it seems to me, much more of a kind of passive approach to meditation. And I don't really see that in the suttas, so much of a passive approach. The Buddha seemed to be very proactive with meditation and his instructions on meditation. You really get in there and apply your energy, and you really have an idea of what you're doing, and you really look at what you're doing to see how well it's working, that kind of thing. So it's just something to reflect on. What really helps us make progress. And I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to share the screen. I have two suttas, one in particular that we'll look at first this morning. And all of these suttas that I'm talking to you about, they really include all four of the IDDHIPADA. But each week, as we're talking about one aspect or one of the four bases, then I'll just pull that part out and put it more emphasis on it. But here again, this is a sutta from the Samyutta Nikaya, book 51, which is the IDDHIPADA Samyutta. So there you'll find a number of suttas that are about the IDDHIPADA. And a lot of them have a lot of repetition to them. You can see this Pali compound at the top of the screen here. Chitta Samadhi Padana Sankara Samana Gatang. That's a mouthful. And it means this. It's this the basis of psychic power that has immersion due to mental development. So the mental development part is the chitta. The immersion is samadhi. And then the sankara gets in there. This is part of the active effort. The padana is effort, and the activity, the sankara is kind of like, this is something that you're pulling together. So there are these. So this particular sutta is called Analysis, and I took some of the translation from Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi and some from Bhante Sujato. This use of different words that I think can help us understand better. So this is the Buddha talking to the mendicants about these four bases of spiritual power, and he says they can be of great fruit and benefit. And then he says, so how is that so? And he talks about, if you develop the basis of spiritual power, possessing concentration, samadhi, due to desire or due to energy or due to mind, mental development or purity of mind, and active effort. This is where the sankara comes in, the volitional formations of striving. So it's the mental constructs that we use to strive to move forward. So thinking, thus my purity of mind. So this is the focus on mind here. The purity of mind will be neither too lax nor too tense. It will be neither constricted internally nor distracted. Another word we could use here is scattered externally. And they dwell perceiving after and before. As before, so after, as after, so before. And this is a continuity. So below, as above, so below, as by day, so at night, as at night, so by day. Don't worry if you can't make sense of this. He's going to explain it in a minute. And so, with an open and unenveloped heart, they develop a mind imbued with luminosity, full of radiance. And I want to make note here that regardless of which of the qualities, whether it's desire or energy or mind or investigation, the last sentence talks about they develop a mind imbued with luminosity. So it's not the same use of mind. So you're developing the mind, the chitta, at that, as a result of this effort, this use of this basis of psychic potency. But when he talks about mind as the basis of psychic potency, it's different than the mind that's being developed and viewed with luminosity. So we're looking at this idea of mental development or purity of mind. Purity of mind here is not also so much about sila, like often we think about it. That's purity of mind, but this is kind of a purity of focus or a clarity. So mental development might be a better choice, but it's you can see it's a little bit challenging to translate. You'll see different words. So mind, the version of Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, he just leaves it as mind, chitta, which, as I said, can be used in different ways. Bhante Sujato talks about mental development. You can also find purity of mind as another way of translating mind as a IDDHIPADA. And what is the purity of mind? So, and what is purity of mind that's too lax? It's purity of mind that's accompanied by, usually the Pali word there is translated as laziness. And that's how Bhante Sujato does it. But Bhikkhu Bodhi thinks it's too strong. He has it in a footnote that he translates it as lassitude. So it's too strong to call it laziness, he thinks, in this case, but it's more of a looseness. It's too lax. And what does it mean when the mind is too tense? Then this purity of mind or mental development is accompanied by restlessness and associated with restlessness. So we've all experienced this, I imagine. I know I have. Sometimes the whole attitude in meditation is too lax. It doesn't really go anywhere. And there's a lot more opportunity for all kinds of kilesas to arise and extraneous thoughts to come in and cause disruption. But if it's tense, if the mind is tense, then we also close down our actual opportunity to experience what's possible there. And that doesn't take us very far either. And what is the purity of mind that's constricted internally? And the Buddha says that's the purity of mind that's accompanied by sloth and torpor, so dull and drowsy. So kind of a different quality than being too lax or being too tense. Interestingly enough, there's this dullness or sleepiness. And what is the purity of mind that's distracted or scattered externally? So this is when the mind is repeatedly distracted, repeatedly disturbed on account of the 5 kinds of sensual stimulation. So the senses are active and we're hearing stuff and seeing stuff, whether we have our eyes closed or not, maybe imagining things, but all the sense stimulation. And how does a mendicant meditate perceiving continuity? So this thing of as before, so after, as after, so before. It's when the perception of continuity is properly grasped, attended, borne in mind, and comprehended with wisdom by the mendicant. And so there was a note in the version that says the phrase. So he talks in that note about what the commentary says, and then it's one of these things that I've seen a lot. We see a lot in Bhikkhu Bodhi's notes. He'll dutifully report on what the commentary says about this piece of the passage, and then says, but that all seems a bit strained. Really, the phrase refers simply to maintaining consistency and attending to the meditation subject in all its aspects throughout the session from start to finish. So you'll see this a lot, where the text is actually, the text of the Buddhist teaching is very clear, and the commentary adds a whole bunch of stuff on top of it that may or may not make sense. But here we are, it's really hard to understand what the heck this means without some indication from the commentary, I guess. But, this idea that, okay, we want to have continuity. So you're paying attention to your meditation object from the beginning of your meditation to the end of the meditation, and you're really not breaking it along the way. And how does the mendicant dwell as below, so above, as above, so below? Now, this is in the sutta. A mendicant reviews the body upwards from the soles of the feet and downwards from the tips of the hair, enclosed in skin, as full as of many kinds of impurities. So we know this text from other places in the suttas. There are in this body head hairs, body hairs, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, sinews, bones, bone marrow, kidneys, heart, liver, pleura, spleen, lungs, intestines, mesentery, contents of the stomach, excrement, bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, tears, fat. But fat is before tears, doesn't matter. Grease, saliva, snan, fluid of the joints, and urine. And they did not include the brain in this one. This is pre-brain. Added to the list. It's in this way that the mendicant dwells as below, so above, as above, so below. And I think maybe some contemplation on how that fits here would be useful. It in my kind of model of how am I working with this purity of mind, with this clarity of intention, with this understanding, with wisdom of where I'm going with this project of meditation, if you will. Maybe that's a little misleading, forgive me. But, this kind of idea that this clarity of mind, having the blueprint in the mind before you build the building, having a complete understanding of what you're about as you work on things, as you're moving in a direction towards a result. How does this fit? So maybe this is some of what the Buddha thought was pretty essential scaffolding, to really have that very strong awareness and connection to the body. And that does make some sense. That we really need to embody and be present with the embodied experience. So I don't know, I'll leave that to your reflection along with everything here, but seeing if that can fit into the way we're seeing this described. Okay, so now the next one is, how does a mendicant dwell as by day, so at night, as at night, so by day? Here at night, a mendicant develops the basis for spiritual power that possesses samadhi due to purity of mind and active effort by way of the same qualities, the same features, the same aspects as they develop the basis for spiritual power by day. Or else by day, they develop the basis for spiritual power that possesses samadhi due to purity of mind and active effort by the same qualities, the same features, the same aspects as they develop that basis for spiritual power at night. So night and day, that's kind of a powerful phrase anyway. You're doing this night and day and night, without it making any difference. And we see this a little bit touched on in this paragraph here at the end of this collection of things, of approaches or guidelines. And how does a mendicant with a mind that is opened and unenveloped develop the mind imbued with luminosity? And he says here, the perception of light is well grasped by a mendicant. So that idea that as our meditation goes deeper, then there is internal light, oftentimes, nimitta. The perception of day is well resolved upon or well fixed upon. So you know the difference. You know that when you open your eyes and it's daylight, you perceive day. But when you're meditating, whether you open your eyes or your eyes are closed, there's light in the mind. So I think this is what he's getting at. The mind is open and unenveloped, and develops the mind imbued with luminosity. So this luminous mind, which is, the kind of language the Buddha used around the mind being limitless, coming to that deeper state. And after he goes through all four of the Iddhipadas, then at the end, he talks about the four bases of spiritual power have been developed and cultivated in this way. They're of great fruit and benefit. When the four bases of spiritual power have been developed and cultivated in this way, a mendicant wields the various kinds of spiritual power. And he talks about all these psychic powers that in the standard list, having been one, you become many, having been many, you become one, and et cetera, and exercising mastery over the body as far as the Brahma world. And of course, we talked on our first time about how the Buddha said, this is something that happens, but it's not really the greatest thing to talk about, because talking about it or even displaying it, you're not going to help anybody understand anything better for themselves. What you need to do is teach the Dhamma, and that's the real power. So even though when we read about the Iddhipadas, we constantly are reading about these kinds of psychic powers, and they do happen for some practitioners and not for others. And there is some value, but that's not the reason to do any of this practice. So then he says at the end, this is the reason to do the practice, actually. These four bases of spiritual power, when they've been developed and cultivated in this way, the practitioner, by destruction of the taints in this very life, enters and dwells in the taintless liberation of mind, liberation by wisdom, realizing they should have changed that to themselves with direct knowledge. And I like the degenderization that Bhante Sujato uses, and so we can apply that regardless of what we're reading, really. So that's the first sutta I wanted to look at. And at this point, are there any comments or questions? Any thoughts on how this works in practice? And I know we haven't checked in yet to see who's all around, but we will do that later. Does it all seem straightforward? Maybe pretty straightforward. Okay. Well, then in that case, there's just one more bit I want to add from a different sutta, and then we can dig into this more. Oh, wait a minute. We have a hand raised. Ron and Serena. Please go ahead.
Yes, luminosity is a sign, I've read in places. It's a sign, and I've read that I guess you see a bright light. So I'm curious about that. Is that something you have to see a bright light to know that the mind is luminous?
Well, certainly they're talking about luminosity here. And I think from what I can tell, first of all, the bright light thing is pretty common. And it can have various qualities. Sometimes it's steady and really fills everything, and sometimes it's pulsing, and people have different experiences. And it is a sign that you're going in the right direction. But there are quite a few signs that can tell you you're going in the right direction. And I do appreciate the question, because I think when the Buddha talks about the mind being luminous, this is, of course, comes with the depth, the greatest depth of our practice, right? To really experience that infinite, what am I trying to say? Infinite, kind of all around luminous or radiant mind. And I don't know that it always has to have that kind of visual aspect to it. So I think the depth of realization of the mind, the like Ajahn Sumedho would say, pure consciousness or conscious awareness, and the mind in that kind of all around infinite, luminous, radiant mind. I'm not sure that equates directly to this kind of sort of mentally visual nimitta. I would think not.
Okay, I saw that in the jhanas. I've studied about the jhanas. I've never done the jhanas.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where I see these signs that after the first
Yeah.
jhana, such and such, the second jhana, such and such, another sign, and so on and so forth till you get to the fourth jhana. So that's where I have seen this. So, and I don't think everybody can get there. So
Well,
I'm understanding it. Everybody can't get to the fourth jhana unless you really gotta have a quiet environment, and so on and so forth. So,
well, even then, yeah. So people like Ajahn Mahabua said, if your mind inclines naturally to jhana, do jhana, otherwise just do samadhi. And it's like jhana starts to become this set of definitions that are not intended to be prescriptive. They're descriptive of some experiences. But you talk to people who, I have every reason to trust and believe there are arahants like Ajahn Ganha and Ajahn Mahabua, and they're like, I asked Ajahn Ganha, how deep does concentration need to be? How deep of a samadhi do you need? And he said, not that deep. So, it's kind of like, okay, do the practice, and don't worry. There are lots of different kinds of nimittas. You can have, no, that's what sign, that's the translation that says it's a sign. Nimitta. I sometimes it's easier to look at the Pali than it is to try to figure out what the English is trying to represent, because a nimitta can be almost anything. There was the monk who did a lot of walking meditation. He had the nimitta that his body exploded and his intestines were hanging from the tree branches. It's a nimitta. Obviously, he came out of that state and his body was still intact. It's like, and anything can go on in meditation. It's like wild sometimes. I had an amazing nimitta one time when I was living at Chithurst, where, and forgive me for those of you who have already heard this story, but I was, Sunday evening meditation at Chithurst back in those days. They had, and maybe they still do, guided meditation, which usually wasn't what they did. And this lovely guided meditation was happening. And in the midst of it, somehow I had this really terrifying nimitta. And I had gone to Chithurst 6 weeks after my granddaughter, my first grandchild, was born. And I had stayed with my daughter to help her with the birth and with the baby for 6 weeks. And then I left to train at Chithurst. And she was sending me photos from time to time, and she sent me I got a pack of photos that day in the mail, and I was looking at the baby pictures, and super cute, of course. And my grandmother, she's going to be the cutest thing in the world, right? And then I go to meditation, and I'm sitting there in meditation, and this nimitta appears of my granddaughter with a missing eyeball and a huge hole in her heart, all bloody and red. And it was so shocking and terrifying that I wanted to jump up off my seat and run to the office or someplace and call my daughter and make sure everything was okay, you know. But I didn't. I sat with that. And I knew what the message was clear. This too is impermanent. Don't get attached. So they don't have that one listed in there, but people see all kinds of things. And if we can gain some wisdom from it, that's the key. So thanks for the question. Yeah, Steve?
Yeah, well, we share a meditation hall with the Tipper, and I've been looking at some of the books in their library, and several of them kind of emphasize lucid dreaming. And when I saw this phrase by day and by night, they kind of put a lot of emphasis on this as a way of continuing to meditate through the night.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't heard anything like that from the Vipassana side.
Or from the, I guess, from the Buddhist side. Is that what you're, or I don't know what group you're sharing the library with, actually. I couldn't catch that part, but.
Oh, it's with a Tibetan group.
Oh, a Tibetan group. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, they got a lot of technology around that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. From the early suttas, I mean, the Buddha talked about going to sleep aware. You know, I don't recall anything in particular. I mean, he did talk about some prophetic dreams he had. So, you know, it is the case that dreams can be meaningful. It is the case that various practitioners have had dreams related to teachers, and there are messages in those dreams and teachings in those dreams. But lucid dreaming is certainly a thing, particularly where you can change the dream as you're dreaming it and stuff like that. And it's, you know, it's another capability of the mind. But I don't see either so much about, you know, I do know that you can continue the practice that you're doing wholeheartedly, you know, really immersed in your dreams, which is understandable. I mean, when I used to hang wallpaper, I could see the wallpaper in my dreams, you know. It's like, you know, it's kind of like, yeah, these things are carryovers, you know. This is kind of what the mind does. And I think if we are so immersed in practice that it carries over through the night in our dreams, that's a benefit for sure. But I don't see any text. I don't know of any text. Someone might bring one to my attention, because just because you've read everything doesn't mean you remember everything, that's for sure. And so if you know of that, I'm happy to hear about it. But I can't really bring anything to mind that specifically talks about lucid dreaming as a way to keep your practice going night and day. But in this case, I think the Buddha is probably talking about, you know, meditating at night, meditating through the night, you know, whether you're meditating in the day or the night. That's my guess.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you. Yeah, Kate.
Yeah, thank you. I'm wondering if you could say a few words about the difference between lassitude or laziness and sloth and torpor. That distinction isn't clear to me.
Yeah. Well, sloth and torpor is this dullness and drowsiness. So, you know, you just kind of like dragging, or you continually kind of maybe going into a floaty. You can tell when your mind is like kind of so drowsy that it kind of starts floating and the thoughts come into it that make no sense. And then if you're mindful, you can go, wait a minute, that thought makes no sense. I got to bring more energy in here, you know, and really work with this. And that is different from laziness. So when we're lazy, we're not applying energy. We're just kind of sloughing off. You know, it's not the same as having that dull mental kind of state. It's being lax. It's not applying ourselves.
Not applying ourselves when we know that it would be better if we did apply ourselves.
Yeah. It's like, you know, we let our mind go off into a daydream instead of stick with the meditation object.
Yeah.
And we're just too lazy to, you know, we're too lax in the moment to just kind of like keep bringing it back, you know? Yeah. So that is different.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Karen.
Hello. Yeah, just going back to the nimittas, actually, I found that really interesting what you said, because it sounded more like your definition of the nimitta is more about having insights versus seeing a big light. And I'd always heard the nimitta defined as just seeing this light, and it was a sign of concentration. But your definition sounds more related to insight. So I found that really interesting, because before I would have said, yeah, I've never seen the nimitta. I don't get that in my meditations. But I definitely feel like I've had insights like the way you just described, where they're kind of earth shattering. They're not just an intellectual understanding. They're a kind of a wow.
Yeah.
I really got the teaching that time kind of response, you know? And I was just curious, like, myself, I don't recall the Buddha talking about nimittas in the Pali Canon.
It's all over the place, but
Is
you
it?
can't tell because you're not looking at the Pali. So when oftentimes when you see the word sign, it can be in a lot of contexts. It means the nimitta. It's really talking about nimitta.
Okay. But see, your definition, I get it. The other definitions I've been hearing, it didn't work. But when you described it the way you did, then I was like, well, yeah, that's kind of makes more sense to me.
Yeah, the Buddha used the word nimitta in a lot of contexts, and arahants also use it often in a lot of different ways. So if you read like the biography of Ajahn Mahabua, you'll see a lot of discussion of nimitta. And it's a very, you know, because it is a good signpost. But this idea of a light in meditation is only one way that you'll experience nimitta.
Okay.
And it's probably the way that, you know, you hear about most, because in our culture, we're very interested in meditation, and we've got these prescribed methods that have come down from different traditions, and they may be talking about that in that very specific way, but not really talking about, you know, like what all appears in the suttas say.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just found that very interesting. Thanks for bringing that up. It clarified a lot for me.
You're welcome, Karen. Yeah, Joyce?
This isn't a question, but I wanted to share something that I learned the other day, which to me was quite amazing, is that like the approach to the jhanas, it's not about like achieving, going to the next jhana and achieving, but it's more letting go, because each time to move to the next jhana, you have to let go of the first jhana, which is a beautiful state. You have to let go of it. And then, of course, that leads ultimately to nibbana, which is letting go of everything, of all attachments. And what just really struck me is just incredible.
Yeah, and it's even more than like letting go of the first jhana, because you're not really like defining, you know, but every jhana you can see that it's dropping something, you know. You've got this, we talk of vichara, you're placing your focus on something and you're holding it there, and then that disappears or that gets dropped. And so Ajahn Brahmali often talks about Ajahn Brahm's way of teaching meditation as being difficult for people to pick up. And I've been hearing this for forever. People really have a lot of admiration for Ajahn Brahm and his ability to go into deep samadhi, and all of that is pretty incredible. And he just kind of like, you know, a lot of times the way he describes it is hard for people to follow or grasp, because we just don't have the same inclination, or we don't have the ability that he has quite seemingly naturally. Of course, that's karmic, probably, undoubtedly, I guess. So what Ajahn Brahmali was, he talks about, you know, as Ajahn Brahm's student, he needed more kind of to go on than Ajahn Brahm's instructions, because it's just so natural for Ajahn Brahm. He doesn't really, you know how to, like, what do you do when it's not natural? So Ajahn Brahmali turned to the suttas, and he started to really dig into the suttas and learn more from there. And he said that what he realized was that Ajahn Brahm, his mind has a natural tendency. So he's like, you know, hearing from other people that, hey, I can't just sit down and relax and my mind goes into jhana. It's not enough, you know. And what Ajahn Brahmali was realizing is, no, when most of us sit down and relax, our mind goes into sleepiness, or our mind goes into fantasy, or our mind goes into something else. And he thought, well, Ajahn Brahm's mind naturally goes into concentration. And then he asked Ajahn Brahm about it, and Ajahn Brahm said what his mind naturally goes into is renunciation. And that's in the same frame that you're describing. It's the letting go, and you're letting go and letting go and letting go and letting go, and you're letting go of all these qualities, all these experiences, the framework of what's described as the first jhana. You're letting go of that, and then, you know, and it just continues in that way. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it was very freeing to me to hear it put in that other frame.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. That it's
yes.
about letting go. Yeah, it
Yes.
is very freeing.
Yeah, thank you.
And it works. Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Joyce. So I want to share this this next little sutta with you, and it comes back to Karen's question from last week. I assume you remember, Karen. We were talking about meditation experience and how we can have all this piti and sukha, and then the mind doesn't want to settle down. And this is about the Iddhipadas, and it's about the mind. It's called the iron ball. At Savatthi, the Venerable Ananda went to the Buddha, bowed and sat down to one side and said to him, "Sir, do you have personal experience of going to the Brahma world by psychic power with the mind-made body?" "I do, Ananda." So you'll see this in the suttas, when the Buddha does this. "But do you have personal experience of going to the Brahma world realm by psychic power with this mind-made body made up of the 4 primary elements?" "I do, Ananda." So it's like the body is mind-made, but it's really a real replica of the body. It's incredible, amazing that the Buddha is capable of going to the Brahma world by the psychic power with the mind-made body. So Ananda is pretty like, wow, and that you have this experience of doing that with a body made up of 4 primary elements. And the Buddha says, yeah, realized ones are incredible and they have incredible qualities. They're amazing and they have amazing qualities. Sometimes the realized one submerges his body in his mind and his mind in his body. He meditates after sinking into the perception of bliss and lightness in the body. So this is kind of where you were talking about being, Karen. You've got all this piti and sukha. The body can become very, very light, almost, and the body parts can disappear, kind of almost not. You can't find them really. And at that time, his body becomes lighter, softer, more workable, and more radiant. And so the idea of, when the mind is still churning, doing this thing of submerging the mind in the body in that perception of bliss and lightness. I think that might be a clearer kind of answer to your question than what I gave before. And then suppose there was an iron ball that had been heated all day. It had become lighter, softer, more workable, and more radiant. In the same way, sometimes the realized one submerges his body in his mind and his mind in his body. He meditates after sinking into this perception of bliss and lightness in the body. And at that time, the body becomes lighter, softer, more workable, and more radiant. Now, I'm not trying to say that we necessarily would experience what the realized one's experiencing, but I think it's on the right track. Sometimes the Blessed One submerges his body in his mind and his mind in his body and meditates after sinking into a perception of bliss and lightness in the body. And at that time, his body easily rises up from the ground into the air. And he wields the many kinds of psychic power, multiplying himself and becoming one and all that, controlling the body to the Brahma world. And sometimes, in meditation, one can really get the sense. My mom said this to me when we were in Thailand once. She said, I feel like I'm just going to lift right up off the bed. She's meditating on her cot. I feel like I'm just going to lift right up off the bed. I didn't notice her levitating, but the feeling was pretty strong. Suppose there was a light tuft of cotton wool or kapok taken up by the wind. It would easily rise up from the ground into the air. In the same way, sometimes the realized one submerges his body in his mind in his body. He meditates after sinking into a perception of bliss and lightness in the body. At that time, his body easily rises from the ground into the air, and he wields the many kinds of psychic power. So just not that we're promoting psychic powers, but that idea of being on the right track is important. And we want to continue to encourage the mind in these directions. Neil?
Yeah, I'm just curious, that phrase bliss and lightness, is that there a translation of Piti and Sukha, or is that something else?
That's a very good question.
Because I've never heard light.
Pali. So let me see if I can quickly go there. Okay. It's going to take me a second. mean, I took it to be something like that. Sukha, certainly. Let me see.
Sukha, you think being bliss or lightness?
Well, it's hard to say because it can be translated either way. The other part is lahu, light. I don't actually see piti, but I see sukha.
Because I was thinking that
Body and light, bliss. I think the sukha is the bliss, and the lightness is actually like it's not heavy. I think that's probably what we got there.
I still struggle with the distinction between piti and sukha. And so I thought maybe if one of them was lightness, it would be a clearer distinction, but
Yeah, no,
not
not
to be.
really. No, but the PT usually, you know, they come together, and the PT is usually more pronounced in the begin, and you can, it's a stronger feeling. It's presents more strongly, and then the sukha is a bit more subtle. But this is the, you know, you see PT in so many of the lists leading to samadhi. And so it's safe to I think it's safe to kind of assume that the PT is going to be there as well in the experience.
Thanks for checking that.
Yeah, sure. Yes, Ron and Serena.
The words mind in the body or the body in the mind. Now, I've been listening to a lot of Ajahn Sumedho, okay?
Mhm.
And he talks a lot about awareness.
Yes, he does.
Something that's indescribable, basically. It's just, but it's something that includes everything. In other words, if I'm aware, if I were awakened and aware, I could then allow anything to come up and contemplate it, investigate it.
Mhm.
That's my understanding of what he's saying. So if the mind is in the body, that's one thing. That's the normal self view, right? I mean, the mind is in the body.
No, I don't think that's what it means here.
Oh, okay.
I
So
don't think that's what it means.
the body is in mind. To me, the body is then in awareness. That's I'm just curious what you're
Yeah.
thinking that is.
Well, when we're having that experience of the spiritual energy, PT, sukha arising, and the body starts to become very diffuse. If the mind is still active, then a way to direct the mind is to go deeper into that experience of the body. So you're really turning the mind more to that felt experience of the body. And that's what I'm relating to, the mind going into the body. And then, you know, it's in that kind of, I mean, it's a spiritual experience. You know, it doesn't really have anything to do with what we think of on a more concrete level of mind and body. But it's the body and the perception. I guess really the perception, the Buddha talked in the sutta about the perception of bliss and lightness. So it's the perception of the body as having these qualities of this spiritual energy. And then when we immerse the mind in that, then all that chatter falls away. And it's similar to, like if that light, that nimitta of light comes and you immerse the mind in that, it's like, where are we going to immerse the mind such that the mind or the perception of mind changes to open, to let go, to allow the wisdom and insight and experience of this other world kind of reality to occur. So that's what I think is being referred to here, something like that. And yeah, there's a lot to learn about, or at least explore around what Longpa Sumedho talks about when he talks about pure consciousness or awareness, because it's in that experience of immersing the mind in that perception of body as it kind of becomes light and diffuse. That's where the knowing is. Yeah.